Welcome, everyone, to another Jewish Physicians Network podcast. In today's recording, we went through an interesting and timely conversation with Rabbi Dr. Yossi Cohen regarding topics relating to keeping Shabbos in the hospital from residents' perspective, as well as considering shift change between uh, observant, non-observant residents, as well as considering shift changes for the upcoming Yomim Tovim, like Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and how that relates to Shabbos. On preparing this recording for uh, upload, I realized that I had not explained some of the halachic jargon, the four constituent components of keeping Shabbos, as we think about them, are shamar. That's to say, keeping Shabbos, refraining from malacha or work that's prohibited on Shabbos, things like turning on a fire, or any of the other 39 malachas that are not allowed on Shabbos. The next part is zachar, to remember Shabbos. The Torah tells us to remember Shabbos, but doesn't explain exactly how to do it. The Chachamim gave us a rubric, and ultimately, remembering Shabbos is accomplished through Kiddush, where we say psukim and have a formulaic bracha with which the Chacham gave us to remember the important parts of Shabbos. And the other is through tefillah, when we daven Ma'ariv, accepting Shabbos in, doing Kabbalah Shabbos. During Kabbalah Shabbos, we also are Mekayim this mitzvah of Zachar Siyam Shabbos, remembering the day of Shabbos. The next one is the next two are really mitzvahs that the Nevi'im told us about. In the Nevi'im, you find a language, the language of kabed es yom Shabbos, give honor to the day of Shabbos, which is generally understood as preparing for Shabbos, making sure that one's food for Shabbos is better, one's clothing for Shabbos is better, and making sure that the day of Shabbos is in itself a very dignified experience. The last component of Shabbos is Einig Shabbos, which is to enjoy Shabbos, which things that we don't necessarily think about as enjoyable, like lighting candles, is actually part of the mitzvah of Einik Shabbos, as well as having special Shabbos foods. With that introduction, and with no further ado, I hope you enjoy today's recording. All right, welcome everyone to another Jewish Physicians Network podcast. I'm joined today by Rabbi Dr. Yossi Cohen from Montefiore. This is our second installment of a resident's perspective. On Shabbos in the hospital, and we have a few topics that came by your inbox, by my messaging, and a few other classic topics and shilas that come up, especially around this time of the year. But before we start, Yossi, how you been?
I'm doing good. How are you doing? It's nice
Really
meeting
good.
you guys. It was fun last time.
This was fun last time. I really enjoyed it, and we got a lot of great feedback. Um, there's probably, not gonna, for anyone that's joining in live, you send me some messages over chat. Otherwise, we should have a few minutes at the end to do some question answers. Um, we are going to try to get through a few shilas today. Um, which one do you want to start with?
I think I want to set up our theme. I think we have a general theme that we want to talk about, based off the shows that we picked here. So I do want to start with our I think we really have to get to this point that we keep alluding to, we keep talking about, but I think we really have to address this elephant in the room, this thing that seems to be hovering over everybody's head, this difference between doing a malacha on Shabbos, as in the isser of working on Shabbos in the hospital, versus the asay, the positive aspect of Shabbos of working in the hospital. I think we really have to address that point. I think from there we can really flow. Everything else might really flow nicely.
All right. So to set us up, we'll give a little bit of a brief clinical vignette that may or may not be inspired by real questions and real experiences. Um, It is Friday night and Shabbos is coming in, very much like we explored last time. We have done a lot of content on how to keep Shabbos, that's to say, how to avoid Chil Shabbos in the hospital. But our questioner feels a little guilty. It doesn't feel like it's Shabbos. And it might be their first Shabbos or it might not be their first Shabbos that they're going to be in the hospital. The question is, how do they properly celebrate Shabbos in the hospital? Um, there are really four mitzvahs, if we break it down, that what we think of Shmir Shabbos that really encompasses. The first one is Shamar, right? Keep Shabbos. That's to say, avoid Malacha. The next one is Zachar. That's to say, to remember Shabbos, which is very vague, and the Chacham had to give it a very definite rubric. it generally ends up being Kiddush or Tefillah. And then the other two are Mitzvah Seder Rabbanan, or from the Nevi'im, and that's Kabed and Oinig. Um, so I think using that rubric, let's kind of explore the positive aspects of Shabbos, meaning how the Chacham expected us to actively participate in Shabbos, not just avoid Isurim.
So these are actually some things which I think are great. Like we really have the opportunity to consciously think about them because, growing up or anybody else that doesn't have the opportunity to save lives on Shabbos, and I choose my language carefully so that we keep talking about the positive side of this. Um, we basically do all four things every night. You come home from you go to shul, right? You come home from shul, you walk into the house, right? The table's set. Hopefully you helped set it. The table's set, right? And your kids are ready to sing Shalom Aleichem with you, and you're getting ready to do kiddush. You're going to wash hands. You're going to have a three-course meal. Like all those different things that we do, which are just like the basis of Shabbos. What anyone who envisions Shabbos in their mind, no matter where you're from, they more or less have that same formula is really just gets at those four things. So now you take away the table with the nice tablecloth. You take away, your computers are off. You take away your family sitting around you, and all of a sudden you will really have to question like what's left and what parts do I have? What don't I have? What can I do and what can't I do? And that really sort of changes something that we have to actually, the part that we should be struggling with also when we're thinking about working on Shabbos.
So the question came in from a resident who's a new resident, and they asked, "How could we, what's the best way to have a meal in the hospital on Friday night?" And I actually thought that was an intelligent question because it allows us to get to at least two or three of the positive aspects of Shabbos. Um, just as a Kabed Shabbos is a really interesting sugya in itself. It's a really interesting topic. It generally applies to preparing for Shabbos. So anything that you do in preparation for Shabbos generally falls under that rubric. So whether it's packing your bag with some grape juice and a challah, and whether it's bringing a different pair of shoes, or intentionally washing your hands before with warm water before Shabbos comes in, that all falls under this category of Kabed. Um, but how do we address the next two mitzvahs, the Zachar and the Einik Shabbos, while in the hospital?
All right, so also the other part that is technically right before Shabbos is lighting candles. It's the other issue we should also be thinking about. But skipping the lighting candles for now, at least. So there's the question obviously of how you do Kiddush, washing your hands, and eating the meal. So I think in general the answer the the simple answer to the question is, what do you mean? You just do it, right? The simple answer to the question is, have your grape juice next to you, make kiddush, wash your hands on the. Hopefully, you have two rolls or whatever it is. Wash your hands on that and have like a little bit of a meal. The problem is, I think two people asked me this question within like a week of each other, and the feedback I got from one of them right after Shabbos was like it was great having this conversation. I didn't sit down for a minute. I didn't have time to do anything for the entire time that I was there, so I didn't actually end up doing any of this. So and that may in fact be the case. Like that might be something that will happen, and it's totally justified if that happens. Like you were taking care of patients, you weren't didn't have the time to do that. One thing that actually awkwardly happened to me once, I forgot to bring grape juice, or I thought I had something happened that I didn't have the grape juice with me, and then it's just convenient to know some of the other opportunities, some of the other options that you have. You can make kiddush on challah, you can make kiddush on chamer de medina, right? You can make kiddush on coffee, you can make kiddush on any other liquid that would qualify as. I probably wouldn't do it on scotch in the hospital; it's probably a bad idea. But otherwise, you do. I don't know what.
I feel attacked the way, my upbringing, especially. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, no, I don't know how they do it in Connecticut. I'm just saying in New York what we do. But that ends up also being those are obviously options that it's good to know that you have these other options in case for whatever reason you thought the Bikur Cholim had an extra thing of grape juice and they don't. So just being aware that you can still do Kiddush on, coffee, Chamid de Medina, or just, the two loaves of bread, if you hopefully have those at least. I don't know how you could do lechem mishnah if you don't have two loaves of bread. That might be a little bit more complicated. But otherwise, like those
Just
are.
to get into it, because actually a resident this past Friday night asked, she wasn't sure how to make kiddush on loaves of bread. Um, she happened to be admitting, and I happened to be taking over the night shift, being called in for it. So the Hashgacha Pratis was there. But the way you make kiddush on loaves of bread, or you wash before, and then you'll just say the yom hashishi, which is not considered a hefsek even after washing, and you just come, straight through instead of saying Beit Briagafen, you say Amaitzi and continue the rest of kiddush. It seems like one of those things that obviously none of us have had to see, but it's something in the old country that was very, very common. Um,
I'm very efficient.
very efficient.
But in all seriousness, it's especially true. Like if you are, you were in that other resident situation and have a minute to sit down, you would think like if you literally are worried that you don't have a minute to sit down, that's not a bad way to try to get everything in at once, especially if you don't know Kiddush off the top of your head. You're not the person saying it every week, so it takes you a little bit more time to whatever find the text or whatever it is.
Yeah. All right. You're right. I did gloss over lighting candles. So how do we how are we makayim the mitzvah of lighting candles in the hospital?
All right, so I have a problem with this question, but I brought it up on purpose. So, and again, you told me last time that since I have the rabbi of the shul thing, I'm allowed to do
100%.
this. So, um, there is the classically, I don't know if this is classically or this is just because this is what Bikur Cholim rooms do in general. And I have a confession to make. The Bikur Cholim room that I have available because Lawrence Hospital next to my shul for some reason doesn't have a Bikur Cholim room. So when patients are there, they utilize things that my shul makes available for them. Like the classically use this idea of there's a condensant light. Condensant light that counts as a fire, and you can on that. You can make a bracha on that. I will say that if you look at the sugya of Kadesh light and where the Makor, where a lot of this comes from, I'm not particularly convinced. And thankfully, there are other people wiser than I am that are not particularly convinced either. Reb Leich in particular has an article on this. Um, but the idea seems to be there was this idea when electricity first became more common, and the sources that people reference when they are talking about condensant light is it sounds like they actually think the Aruch HaShulchan has a classic piece on this, where they think that there's actually a fire in there, and that's what electricity was. You understand this idea of electrons, or whatever, however electricity actually works. They thought there was a real fire. I mean, the Aruch HaShulchan, his piece, he writes, "I don't really understand how this works, but someone told me there's a fire, so I'm just going to go with that." And that's how he talks about it. That's where you get it with a lot of this idea of like on Yontiv, you could turn on electricity, you can't. Like there's certain ideas out there. And that also translates into condensant light. Like condensant light, if anything, I would think it fits more into like a Rambam's version of Bishul, right? It's making metal hot. It's right. That's Rambam's Bishul. That counts in his category. That's not lighting a fire. So, that being said, and especially defending, I guess, the idea that my Bikur Cholim room does have these condensant lights. I'll say for patients, I have a lot of empathy for. I guess it's good because when they have to be in the hospital on Shabbos, it's already emotionally difficult enough, and then you tell them that they can't. There's no way for them to actually light candles in the hospital on Shabbos, and you're probably going to crush these poor people. And I think they're going to do it anyway because the Bikur Cholim room is going to give it to them. So whatever, if it's available in my show, maybe it's the Lifnei Iver thing, part of the different conversation. But I'll make it. I have it available if they want it. Whatever, fine. Can you actually use it to light candles? I'm not really sure that it's so obvious. I think that you might end up being in a situation where you just like, you just can't light candles on Shabbos. There are other ways of doing oneg that are not the mitzvah itself, right? That is, you make sure that the room is maybe you clean up the room a little bit or whatever it is your on-call room or whatever it is that you have around you. You could do other things, but the actual specific mitzvah of actually lighting candles. I'm not sure there's a way to actually do it in the hospital on Shabbos. But again, I want to emphasize that a lot of people disagree with that.
So yeah, you're highlighting this is a very active sugya, and in general, from what I remember from the sugya, there were three main opinions. One, that any electric light might be okay because the ultimate takana was for you to be in a place where there's light, and therefore you might be able to just turn on and off the light in your room. With the kavana that you're doing it, the shame of lighting candles. Um, Bracha aside for just a
Yeah.
moment. The next option was an incandescent light, and specifically within incandescent light, I think Rosh Zalman Auerbach, his piece where he writes he recommends that they use batteries because that's most similar to a fuel source that's eventually going to run out, and if it's connected to a power, to an external power source, it might be less similar to lighting a candle. that would probably be, the next thing that's most defensible, just with the way the Poskim write it out.
And to
Um,
that point, Shlomo Zalman definitely knew how electricity worked. So he
100.
wasn't saying it with that perspective.
No, 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 no. And which kind of buttresses the fact that there's many, when someone approaches their Rav to explore this topic, there's a
100%.
standard deviation of many acceptable psakim. And we really recommend engaging with your Rav and exploring what works for you, so to speak, what works for the derech that you happen to be on. And then the last option is kind of what you've been alluding to, which is this isn't Ka'ain the way it was actually, this isn't similar to the actual takana that Chachamim made, which is lighting candles with an actual wick, with an actual, oil, which is not possible in a hospital because that would go against fire safety, which is not something that one should play around with. Um, I think that when we wrote the article, and we'll put it down in the show notes with a Substack with some further reading for all the subjects that we'll touch on tonight. Um, I think we brought all those different options, and ultimately, I do think it is it is something to engage with your Rav about. But your position actually probably sounds very it sounds harsh, but it probably is the easiest to read into the Makars. That's to say that there's no real great option to light candles.
Right. And also, I would say that I completely agree with you. Those are the three positions. In general, like within this idea of how to think about this issue. And what I was also trying to highlight was there are sources that make it sound like it's actually lighting candles. I want to clarify that's different, right? That's not what Rosh Shlomo Zalman saying, right? Those older sources, it sounds like they just, perspective didn't really understand how electricity worked. And that's a different perspective. You really shouldn't use those sources in the sugya. Like you should use their halachic standing, but understanding that their mitzvahs may have not been completely accurate, which happens all the time, as we know. Like that's not what do you call it? Scandalous. Hopefully in our community it's not scandalous to make that point.
No, and if anyone's having an issue with that, then I'll refer them to the shir that you recorded on the JPN YouTube channel years ago, the rabbi or the doctor,
All right.
and they can really pearl clutch listening to you explore that topic there. Um,
I maybe get more infuriated, but whatever.
It was a great sugi as well. Okay, so kind of going through the rest of it. The next question that came up was, and it doesn't seem immediately relevant to this topic, but it does have some relevance. Actually, first maybe let's go to the other one. So, for all those emotional reasons that you kind of went over, you might not be able to classically explore or express some of the positive aspects of Shabbos in the best way. Many people will try to switch their day off for Shabbos.
Right. Sorry. Okay.
Sometimes,
I
yeah.
just thought of, can we just comment one more thing about the Lenny Khan just reminded me on the other end of Shabbos for Havdalah? That what ends up happening a lot is if you don't have like Havdalah, you can do without this question also count. I think I sent it to you, but you can do Havdalah without Bisamin, without fire. So whatever position you lie in there, if you don't have fire for some reason you don't have Bisamin with you, like you could still do the rest of Havdalah. You just skip those two brachas. So like you still Moti Shabbos should be doing Havdalah in the hospital. You would just skip those brachas that you can't do. And ideally, you'd have an opportunity to do them, but if not, you would just skip it and still make Havdalah.
And you
Sorry.
can do it later.
You're true, but if you want to eat or whatever it is.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Um, no, no, not that you could do Havdalah later. You can do the Beri Meir Eish and Beri Minim B'Samim later that night when you get
Later
home.
that night, correct, but not the next day. Once it comes the next day, this just happened by Tisha B'Av, Fal, and Shabbos, not in which we're familiar with the halach. It's the same thing. It's the same consideration.
This year's quiz was hard.
Sorry,
All right.
I
All right. So going to
interrupted.
the next topic, which is trying to switch your shifts.
Yes.
A common issue that will come up is that you'll notice that the co-resident that you want to switch with may themselves be Jewish. Whether or not their observance is another topic. So the question that has come up actually many times in the Paskim was, are you allowed to switch your shift with someone who's not Shabbos observant? Is that tantamount to Lufnei Iver listed in Michshol, putting someone, that's to say, in a situation where they might not be, best suited to make what halachically might be the best choice in that situation.
Right. And then I think potentially the less complicated version of that question is, can I swap to take a shift that is working on Shabbos, which I think we're going to get to as well. So the lifting Ivrit, so there's a classic machlokes of Shlomo Zalman and Rav Moshe. This is, any time anyone talks about this question, right? That those are the two that you think about. where actually can't remember who said what, which, but the question is it better that you work on Shabbos and not the person who maybe is not as familiar with the halacha? Because at least you would know how to keep halacha appropriately. And if you switch with them, you'd be putting them in a position where they would be Mechal Shabbos. Or alternatively, if they weren't in the hospital, they'd be home and presumably doing things which you're anyway not allowed to do on Shabbos. At least this way in the hospital, a lot of those things would be justified because they're taking care of patients. So that's a classic machokas. You could take that as you wish. I will say that I think part of it changes a little bit in light of many of the discussions we've been having here, because our point that we've been trying to make over and over again here is that especially in a contemporary setting where a lot of what we do is over computers, electronics, most of the things that we do in the hospital are okay to do on Shabbos. Like it is okay. And that's really our point. Know how to do it, but it is okay. And if you're switching with someone who isn't religious, or is not as familiar with the halacha, you might not necessarily be doing that lifnei ibra that Ramesh and Shlomo Zalman were so concerned about. I mean, your biggest issue would probably be the traveling to the hospital. So I don't know if they live across the street, maybe you don't have that issue. At least by my hospital, it's where a lot of the residents live. So you can potentially avoid a lot of those issues. So potentially like that question becomes significantly less. The stakes are significantly lower, and it would in fact be okay to do it, irrespective of whether or not you think like of Moshe or Rosh Hashanah.
So just to give you some pushback, but first just to review those opinions because they're actually counterintuitive. Rosh Hashanah Auerbach's take on this was that since it's an active mitzvah to be in the hospital, taking care of patients who find themselves in a pikuach nefesh situation, therefore there's no lifnei iver, but there's also no reason for you to do it. And someone else being in the hospital on Shabbos might not know that to press print is a bigger halachic issue, and might not know that to use a pen and not the computer would be an issue deraisa. So for him, he's actually more concerned about the lifnei iver because he assumes that if you're a firm physician, you can keep Shabbos fully in the hospital. Ramesh is of the other opinion, and he says that let's be realistic here. If your colleague isn't observant, they're not going to be learning, daf yomi on their day off just because they're outside of the hospital. And since they're not keeping Shabbos anyway, it's a net negative and practically kind of like what you were saying. There's actually, in a regular, 21st century home, there's probably less issues being in the hospital overall if you were actually going to bean count how many malachas you're going to end up doing. Um, uh, but so just to offer a little bit of pushback, it's to keep Shabbos in the hospital might be fully possible if you know how to keep Shabbos in the hospital. But that being said, it's probably it's a net even regardless, and therefore everyone really says you would be allowed to pursue the switch. When we asked this question to Rav Asher Weiss, he had the same position of Rav Moshe Feinstein, and his comment about Daf Yomi was actually his. That was his comment. He says it's not going to be
Now the
doing
girl
Daf
Asher
Yomi
Weiss
there.
comment.
It is very much. I've totally stolen valor on that one. Okay. It was funnier when he said it, just to
It was the
be
live audience, probably.
something like that. All right, fine. So we dealt with a regular Shabbos, and the shaila that comes up in Elul and Tishrei when people are looking at their schedules and they realize honestly how much of a mess this year's calendar is. Rosh Hashanah, I think, is Tuesday, Wednesday. And the rest of the time don't necessarily get any easier. And to get 3 days off in 1 week might be completely impossible, especially if you're on a 6 and 1. But the question is, if you have 3 days that you'd like to get off, Shabbos and 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, do you have to take preference to Shabbos, or can you give preference to the first day of Rosh Hashanah or the second day? And let's explore that, assuming that you have any ability to try to force a result here.
So yeah, so full disclosure is I was scheduled to work on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and part of Sukkot. So that's very much uh, personally feel the pain of the schedule this year. So there's the main thing that I think we're really trying to highlight. I think you and I have been working on this for a long time now, and really keep trying to point out is that when we're working in the hospital on Shabbos, at least if you, and especially hopefully if for all of us that are familiar with Hilchos Shabbos, our whole point is that again, there's these two aspects of Shabbos. There's the Lot Aseh and there's the Aseh, right? There's the Lot Aseh, which is the malachas of Shabbos, and there's the Aseh of keeping Shabbos, doing Kiddush, having Shabbos meals with your family. It's a different part, it's a different aspect. It's the positive part of Shabbos, the beautiful part of Shabbos, not the don't do this, don't do that. So for the don't do this, don't do that, our whole point is that you're not actually doing any melacha. That's our idea. Our idea is that sorry, you're doing justified melacha, I should say, right? All the melacha that you're doing is for patient care, and therefore it's okay to do it. It's why I think the same reason why not just Rosh Hashanah to make it maybe slightly less complicated, but a situation where a resident recently asked me if they could switch their Shabbos shifts, and one of them would end up with them working on Shabbos for longer than the other shift. Can they do it? I was like, yes. The point is, it's not the hospital. Just because the hospital put your schedule so that you're working on Shabbos, that's not the justification why you're allowed to work on Shabbos. The justification why you're allowed to work on Shabbos is because you're taking care of patients and the malachas that you're doing are justified for that care, especially if you know Hilchos Shabbos. That's our whole point. And so the same thing would really apply for Shabbos versus Rosh Hashanah versus Yom Kippur versus Sukkot. The same principle applies, right? And that is that's true, which I think was the basis of the question, is that true Shabbos is a bigger Isser, and in theory, I should work on Rosh Hashanah over Shabbos. But the point is that irrespective of Shabbos, Rosh Hashanah, whatever it is, the malachas are the same. You're taking care of patients. You're allowed to be taking care of patients, and therefore it's fine to do that. Which then makes the question, there's another part of this question, and that is there is something unique about Rosh Hashanah which doesn't exist on Shabbos, and that is blowing shofar, for example. If you're working ICU shift on Rosh Hashanah, are you really going to be able to go hear shofar? Are you going to be able to hear someone blow the shofar? Whereas if you're home, you would be able to do that. Whereas for Yom Kippur, are you going to be able to fast on Yom Kippur if you're working in the hospital? Like I almost every other fast, Tisha B'Av, even Tisha B'Av, you can always come up with an excuse as to why you're able to eat if you really need to. Yom Kippur, it's hard. Even if we say you can eat at the end of the day, it's still this year, and there's a whole bunch of other things that are going to go into it. It's not that simple. And so I think to the point of the question is yes, you can you should consider the assay part of this of the mitzvahs that are unique to Rosh Hashanah, to Yom Kippur, to first day of Sukkot. We're sitting in the sukkah is a mitzvah. First night with a mitzvah to sit in the sukkah, where you might not be able to do that in the hospital. That part should potentially take a higher precedence than the isurim that the Shabbos might be a greater isur than Chag.
I just want to highlight that's a very difficult pshat to come to as an Ashkenazi, right? Because the rubric that you were alluding to was that there's a Gemara in Yuma. Gemara in Yuma says that someone who got sick, you tried to give them a lesser Isser first. The Ramah reads that into Hilchos Shabbos. That's to say that whenever you have the um, uh, responsibility to keep Shabbos by breaking it, you are going to use the lesser Isser first. I think so. You just to steel man the argument would be that Shabbos is an Isser Skilla. It's a stronger mitzvah I say. So you theoretically wouldn't be able to. But going back to the whole theme of this is that pursuing the mitzvah Pekuach Nefesh is a tremendous mitzvah, and that's actually the way Rav Asher Weiss paskins. And in the a link that we'll send out with it. The rest of us, Rabbi Cohen, need Makuris for
I know it's more fun to do it this way.
it is more fun to do it this way.
We could do shiurim, but this is more fun. No, you don't have
Okay.
this conversation. I like this having a conversation, and then we take turns explaining what the other one said, and whether or not what's what the other person meant. But it's a great explanation anyway, so who cares?
Misha Achse Bulmus. It's a fun sig. It's a fun sig. And honestly, thanks for your time, man. I know that you have to run at 9 o'clock sharp. I think we got to most of what we wanted to get to tonight. Um, do you want to end off with any final remarks?
There was one comment that you made after the recording went off last time, which I think deserves to be highlighted in a recorded session. So I want to go back to that comment if that's okay with you. I don't know if you remember it. If you do, I'd
I
prefer you say
don't.
it. You don't remember? I think the comment was that the burden of proof is on us in regards to coming up with ways to, let's say, avoid doing certain things in the hospital on Shabbos, where there are certain things. For example, I think it was like using the hand sanitizer coming out of the rooms or something like that, the automatic ones, um, where people were feeling concerned, coming up with tricks, how to avoid some of these situations. You really have to wash your hands all the time. Can you do it like every couple of times or whatever it is? But the point is that overall, I mean, the burden of like the hospital's not out to get religious Jews. I don't think that's not where they're coming from. They have quality control. They have QI projects. There's a lot of time spent in how to set up a hospital to protect patients, to ensure that transfer of care is done appropriately, which again is also taking care of patients. And so, like, if you ever want to suggest, or if you're asking someone a question about what you can avoid, what you can't avoid, you have to have some pretty good evidence to show that it's okay to skip these things, like a discharge paper. I think this is an incredibly important part of medicine. You can't just say, well, that's not really that important. The burden of proof, I think, is on us, and you said it beautifully, and I just wanted to make sure we had it on a recording. I apologize saying it for you, but I guess we take turns explaining each other anyway, so why not?